try to picture this, we're constantly told that the downfall of civilizations comes from catastrophic events, wars that scorch the earth, invasions that shatter walls, or financial ruin that breaks the back of an economy. But that's a sleight of hand. The true unraveling doesn't begin when outsiders arrive with weapons or demands. It begins quietly, beneath the surface, when the foundation crumbles under the weight of its own foolishness. It begins when brilliance is seen as a threat and the bland become heroes. When the sharpest minds are seen as problems to be managed, not assets to be protected. The real poison leaks in the moment insight is dismissed as dangerous when people stop thinking for themselves and start applauding the loudest voice in the room. This is not some fringe idea cooked up in dusty corners of the internet. This is a cycle carved into the spine of every once mighty civilization. You can trace its arc through the ruins of forgotten capitals and into the flickering glow of modern screens. Whether you scan the marble ruins of Rome or flip through today's headlines, the symptoms echo. Truth loses its value, illusion becomes the norm, and ignorance is elevated like it's some kind of virtue. Collapse doesn't wear armor and carry a flag. It wears a grin, tells a joke and hosts a talk show, and by the time anyone realizes what's happening, it's too late. The system, once fueled by creators, thinkers, and visionaries, now survives by rewarding those who simply comply, perform, and parrot back what they're told. Consider this: at the twilight of any great system, the people at the top are not builders or thinkers anymore. They are gatekeepers. They don't light torches, they extinguish them. And who rises in a world like that? Not the ones who ask hard questions or challenge lazy assumptions. No, those people get pushed to the edge, labeled as difficult, cynical, or out of touch. The spotlight goes to the smooth-talking, smiling faces who say exactly what they're supposed to, never more, never less. The people with hollow slogans and oversized confidence. The ones who know that sounding right matters more than being right. Have you ever looked around and wondered how someone utterly unqualified ended up in charge? Why it feels like logic is treated like treason and critical thought is a punishable offense? That uneasy feeling, that sense that something's off, it's not in your head. You're not alone. You're awake in a system that depends on people staying numb. When ancient Rome entered its final chapters, decisions that once balanced empires gave way to distractions. Senators who once debated policy and philosophy now pandered to the crowd. The hungry masses, rather than being empowered to think, were fed bread and games, cheap thrills in the Colosseum, while rot crept into the bones of their world. Those who questioned this were laughed off, sometimes imprisoned, sometimes worse. And the ones who danced and screamed and pointed at the carnage in the arena, they were hailed as heroes of the hour. In Nazi Germany, early voices of reason were silenced almost immediately. Those who challenged propaganda, who saw through the spectacle, who tried to sound the alarm, they were dealt with swiftly. What was left behind wasn't strength. It was a hollow echo chamber filled with obedient mouths. Reality crumbled, but the illusion of control was maintained until the bitter end. Look around today. Browse a few feeds, flip through channels. The bizarre is celebrated, the absurd is rewarded, the shallow is praised. Outrage and simplicity spread faster than reason and reflection. We haven't just normalized ignorance, we've weaponized it. Not just allowed it, but turned it into an economic engine. The more someone lacks depth, the more digestible they are. The less they think, the more comfortable they become to those in power. That's no accident, it's a blueprint. The process doesn't begin with a declaration. No one stands in front of the world and announces, "From this day on, critical thinking is forbidden." It's far more cunning than that. It starts with small decisions. giving promotions to those who don't ask too many questions, showering praise on those who echo consensus, teaching young minds to memorize instead of explore. Step by step, the system begins selecting for obedience, and suddenly, brilliance becomes a liability. This inversion, this filter that once elevated insight and now suppresses it, is not loud. It's nearly invisible, but its effects are devastating. As time passes, the people who rise to power aren't those with talent or vision. They're the ones who play the part best, the ones who conform most smoothly. They don't challenge, they don't innovate, they recite, they perform, and they're promoted again and again. What you get is a hierarchy that selects not for wisdom, but for predictability. The empire doesn't fall all at once. It rots from the inside out. Every layer that once held brilliance now favors compliance. Innovation is stifled. Integrity is replaced with theater. Problems go unsolved because no one in the room has the guts or the brain to face them. And when real crises strike, there's no one left who can actually lead. The minds that could have steered the ship were dismissed long ago for being too honest, too curious, too human. Rome didn't explode in one moment. It corroded, 1,000 cuts, none fatal on their own, until the whole structure collapsed under the weight of its own stupidity. Most people didn't even notice until the gates fell because their attention had been pointed elsewhere. And by then, it was far too late. In the Qing dynasty's waning years, similar patterns emerged. A once proud system that had honored scholars and rewarded critical thinking slowly gave in to flattery and internal decay. Examinations became exercises in memorization, not understanding. The advisors with real insight were sidelined. They were replaced by flatterers who told rulers what they wanted to hear. The empire didn't just stop thriving, it stopped thinking. And when the storm came, there was no one left who remembered how to hold the wheel. You might say, well, that was then. This is now. But is it really so different? Today, the loudest voices dominate the conversation. Public figures aren't celebrated for their wisdom. They're cheered for their volume. What matters isn't content, but delivery. Image, not ideas. Influence, not depth. In such a world, the wise don't disappear all at once. They fade into the background, not because they have nothing to say, but because no one wants to hear it. The message is clear. If your ideas are too deep, too nuanced, too unsettling, you're a threat. You might be labeled controversial, or worse, you might be ignored completely. This isn't random. This is a system designed to reward simplicity and punish complexity. And so the thinkers, the ones who could offer something meaningful, start to go silent. Not because they've changed, but because they've learned that clarity is dangerous, that speaking the truth might cost them their peace, their position, or even their safety. So they hesitate, they shrink, they choose quiet over confrontation, and slowly the cultural conversation is filled with noise, loud, repetitive, predictable. And then something even more dangerous happens. That silence, it becomes normal, accepted, expected. The wise no longer speak, the fools are never questioned, and a generation grows up never hearing the sound of depth. They don't even know what they're missing. They mistake noise for wisdom, applause for merit, slogans for thought. The inverse filter has done its work. The system no longer just allows foolishness, it requires it. The only way to move forward is to stay shallow, agreeable, and easy to digest. No one ever says this outright. But every reward, every punishment, every social cue sends the same message. Don't challenge, don't question, just nod and repeat. And you may have felt this yourself. That moment where you held back a thought, not because it was wrong, but because it was too real. too honest, too sharp. You knew it wouldn't land well. You've seen what happens to those who speak uncomfortable truths. They're met with blank stares, polite smiles, or outright hostility. So you said nothing. You moved on. This is how it spreads. Not through violence, but through exhaustion. Through the slow, grinding message that thinking too much is a burden. That depth is dangerous. That it's better to be silent than sincere. But here's the thing. If you're still watching, still listening, still questioning, then you haven't been erased. Not yet. You still carry the ability to see clearly, and that clarity, that resistance to numbness, is more powerful than it seems. Because every system built on illusion is terrified of people who can see. You don't have to shout to start a revolution. It begins much more quietly than that. Often it begins in solitude, in the mind of a single person who chooses not to lie, not even once, even when everyone else has agreed to pretend. That kind of integrity might look invisible at first. It may seem like weakness in a world that confuses loudness with strength. But the most powerful shifts don't always make noise. They spread slowly, like heat under stone, until suddenly everything catches. So what happens when the system built on illusion finally begins to crack? What happens when the noise gets too loud, when the spectacle becomes unbearable, when the surface can't hide the rot any longer? It's not just failure, it's a reckoning. Because underneath all that glitter and gloss is a hollow core, and once pressure hits, there's nothing strong enough to hold it together. In the world we live in now, intelligence often feels like isolation. If you still question, still observe, still look beyond the surface, you're not applauded, you're avoided. Being thoughtful is seen as being difficult. Being honest is confused with being hostile. And the more awake you become, the lonelier it may feel. But that loneliness isn't a flaw, it's a signal. It means your mind still works in a time that's designed to dull it. Modern culture doesn't ask you to understand, it asks you to perform. It doesn't reward depth, it rewards pace. The faster you react, the more you consume, the less you question, the better you fit. This isn't just happening by accident. It's the consequence of an environment engineered to keep people too distracted to think and too entertained to care. Take the education system. Once its purpose was to shape minds capable of handling complexity, capable of building something new. But now, it's often reduced to standardized routines and obedience training. You're not taught to explore, you're taught to conform. You memorize, regurgitate, and forget. Original thought becomes the enemy of efficiency, and anyone who dares to ask why is labeled a distraction. In the past, education was a bridge to freedom. Now it's often a factory line that molds students into carbon copies. Question too much and you're a disruption. Deviate from the script and you're flagged. This isn't just a mistake, it's a design. Because people who ask hard questions are hard to control, so they're trained to stay quiet early. Now, take a step outside of the classroom and into the digital world. We were promised that the internet would democratize knowledge, that anyone could speak and everyone would listen. But what did we get? A machine that doesn't amplify depth, it boosts outrage. Not reflection, but reaction. Algorithms don't care about truth, they care about clicks, and the result is a society that feeds on speed, not understanding. Subtlety dies in that kind of climate. The quiet thinker is buried beneath a mountain of influencers shouting into the void. Ideas that once took decades to develop are now squeezed into seconds of content. And in that collapse of time, we lose nuance. We lose meaning. And worst of all, we lose the thinkers who can no longer find space to be heard. When truth is condensed to trending hashtags and moral debate is reduced to memes, the soul of society starts to erode. And in its place rises a kind of digital carnival, lights, music, movement, but no substance. Just a parade of distractions designed to make sure no one notices the structure collapsing in the background. It's no wonder the thinkers retreat. Not because they lack courage, but because they've seen the cost of being right in a culture that prefers being loud. Every time a voice of reason is drowned out by a sound bite, every time an inconvenient truth is mocked while a convenient lie is shared, the system teaches people to stay shallow. Have you ever held back a thought, one that cut through the noise, one that revealed something uncomfortable but necessary, only to stop yourself because you knew the room wasn't ready? That moment is the quiet tragedy playing out every day across the world. A slow suffocation of clarity, a culture slowly convincing its best minds to keep their wisdom hidden. Because in this era, to be wise is not only rare, it's burdensome. The sharper your mind, the more you notice the inconsistencies, the games, the contradictions. You see the price of the truth. You see how much easier life would be if you just played along, smile, nod, say the safe thing, become the echo instead of the signal. But that path, while tempting, leads somewhere darker. Because when all the signals disappear, when the only voices left are the ones that repeat the script, a civilization loses more than its thinkers. It loses its compass. It no longer knows what's real. It floats untethered in a sea of noise, waiting for someone, anyone, to say something true. And that's where you come in. If you're one of those people who still thinks deeply, who still reads between the lines, who still feels that quiet pulse of truth beneath the static, don't surrender it. Even if no one claps, even if no one sees, because that quiet courage, that refusal to abandon your own clarity, is what keeps the world from sliding completely into madness. You don't need to fight every battle. You don't need to argue with everyone who refuses to listen. But you do need to hold the line within yourself. Protect your integrity like it's sacred, because it is.